You're listening to China Manufacturing Decoded from the Sophie's Group. Hello, this is episode 246 today of the podcast. Adrian here with Renaud. Hi, Renaud.
Hi, Adrian. So, what is the topic today?
Well, we're recording early December, and so we are a month out from the inauguration for the second time of President Trump. And this is such a hot topic, and it's affecting, well, definitely some of our customers, but so many of the listeners and people, even non-American businesses, of course, right? Which is what tariffs are going to be put in place by Trump in his second administration. So what we're trying to do today is understand his trade moves based on the news that we've been reading ever since he won the election and made loads of statements about tariffs, which is one of the most beautiful words in the dictionary, according to the man himself. So that's what we're trying to do. Of course, all of this is subject to change, but we will do our best to give you the up-to-date based on news sources.
Right. And so, yeah, we're recording this on December the 4th. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever he tweets or whatever says, soon, we don't know yet. And by the way, he hasn't been inaugurated yet, right? You said 1 month after his inauguration, is still the president-elect. He's just been elected. Yeah.
Yeah. Early January. Right.
So it will be in about 1
mm-hmm.
week. Okay, maybe.
That's right. So yeah, tariffs. I mean, a lot of different opinions about it, right? But they seem to be something that Trump believes is a very important tool.
Yeah. So that's why if you ask people, okay, what's the big thing that Trump did in his first term? What do people remember? Actually, Trump did not do much. He spent, I don't know, the first 1 or 2 years just kind of learning the ropes of, I can't do that. Oh, really? I can't do that. Oh, they will block this. Oh, they will challenge this. And then it doesn't, we cannot do that. Oh, really? And then he did a few things. But yeah, for sure, when it comes to international trade, imposing tariffs on a bunch of different products coming from China is probably the biggest thing that people have in mind, right? That's sort of his legacy. It was not undone by the Biden administration. Actually, the Biden administration, about 1 year ago, 6 months or 1 year ago, I forget. Said, okay, a bunch of things like solar panels and batteries for electric vehicles, etc. For all of that coming from China is going to be hit by extra tariffs, going up to a total of 100% tariff. So it means that you buy something that costs you landed cost, let's say 100, and actually you need to pay another 100 in tariff to import it into the US, right? So Biden and his administration basically tacitly recognized that, okay, this is not a bad way to do that. Okay. So just because there's a bipartisan, strong support from across the political spectrum in the US to just do China bashing and just hit China, right? Okay. So that's the big move that Trump likes to remind people of, I did this and look at that and I'm protecting your jobs, all right? And I'm going to do that on a grander scale this time. And you see, it's been working and we're going to do more of that. And the tariffs are going to raise money and, people don't really understand where that money comes from, but it's like, it's on the imports. So like we're hitting China. It's like China's paying. And then we don't need to have very high income tax and so on. So look at that, you have more money in your pocket and you have better jobs and everything. So that's great, right? What's not to love? And of course,
that's compelling.
Yeah, right. Of course. Who would not vote for that? The problem is that who pays for the tariffs? Well, it's the importers. And in that article in the Harvard Business Review that you just showed me a few minutes ago, that came out 2 days ago. So it's called What the Last Trump Tariffs Did, according to researchers. Well, what they found is that in most cases, who paid the tariffs? Well, the importers, and to a certain extent, depending on the product category, the consumers. So sometimes it was all passed on to the consumers, like, for example, washing machines. And in some cases, the retail prices just couldn't really be passed through, like couldn't absorb this increase, and then the margins of importers were squeezed, and that might mean that maybe more retailers went directly buying from China rather than buying through importers to cut some of that margin. Okay, the research did not really go into that, but I'm kind of imagining the ways that the supply chain kind of restructured itself to avoid passing through too much cost to the consumer. And did it lead to a lot of reshoring of manufacturing to the US and a lot of new manufacturing jobs and things like that? Not really, right? Not really. So did it bring in extra tax revenue? Yeah. Did it reduce the amount of money that flows for the trade of goods from the US to China? A bit. But when you look at the customs data, you only see the country of origin of the products, the final products. The problem is, where's all the value added, going to? If you take the example of, I don't know, let's say some phones or whatever, the tablets made by, let's say, by Foxconn in Vietnam. They have a factory just a few hours away from the border with China, and you have trucks going there every day from Guangdong province with a bunch of components and sub-assemblies and everything. And then they do the final assembly in Vietnam, and they ship it out to the US. And in the customs data, the trade records show, there's a lot of products going from Vietnam to the US. But where's all the money actually flowing to? It's still mostly flowing to China. Okay, so it's a very complicated product, very, very complicated situation. Very hard to really account for, exactly who are the winners and losers, and did it work and did not, and what worked, what did not work, right? So maybe we should not go into that, because we would prepare for maybe an entire year just to collect all the data that we like. So that's but basically I think your question was, what was the objective? The objective was to sort of cut China's wings a little bit.
Yes.
And in a way they could say, well, look at them now, they're struggling. Okay. I'm not sure there's a direct cause and consequence sort of link here, but an objective was to raise more tax from tariffs. Okay, that's certainly happening. But, just spending it because they keep digging, their debt keeps going up and up and up, right? The federal deficit is pretty bad.
and consumers are paying more, right? So although you might not, no government wants to say we're going to increase the rate of income tax, for example. No one's going to like that. But if they're able to raise tax revenue and not do that, maybe the public think, oh yeah, they're my tax is staying at whatever percent. And they don't think so much about what happens when they're, at the grocery store or at the hardware store or whatever. But in fact, they are paying more. And that's where the tax revenue is coming from.
Yeah. And of course, when you do something like that, when you take big measures like that, there's secondary effects, right? I mean, one secondary effect is the amazing rise in all the parcels sent by air, so highly polluting, that are declared with a value under $800, so that the de minimis exemption just flows through the customs. The CBP administration doesn't look at it, goes direct. Maybe it's drop shipped to consumers, maybe it's sent to stores and things like that. And there's so many of these parcels, and there's no import duty, there's nothing. Like, it's under $800, like, don't even look at it, whatever, right? For, anyway, 99.9% of it is not really checked carefully. So that's one secondary effect. Of course, China also retaliated with some tariffs, targeted tariffs, and
I think 20% on a lot of American goods. Yeah.
Sure. And especially agricultural products. So the farmers had to be subsidized, So some of the money that was raised, actually, they had to spend it back on bailing out some farmers and giving a bunch of subsidies to keep various stakeholders happy. So, it's more political than anything else, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And it's more about the geopolitical balance, between the US and China, of like, maybe we should not have our hands in each other's pockets too much. Like, let's have a bit more distance, right? I think that these are the big topics here.
And let's just mention the trade imbalance as well, right? And I think that's a big driver of it, and that's why it's kind of bipartisan agreement on this issue, because the trade imbalance between China specifically and the States, it's a real thing, there's a huge imbalance, perhaps a little bit less now because of the tariffs, but still there's a lot more goods flowing from China to the States than the opposite direction. And they don't like that, especially when, it's to the benefit of a rival country. And rival, again, we're starting to become very geopolitical, and that's not what this particular podcast exactly is about, but rivals for many, many reasons. If we just talk about the tariffs that were originally enacted for a minute, and then I'll go on and I'll talk about some of the statements that Trump has very recently made. So in 2018, I think, was kind of his first tranche of tariffs, and they were generally on a lot of the typical imports from China, about 34 billion in July, then another $16 billion worth of imports, and then in September, $200 billion worth of imports, if the sources I'm reading are to be believed, right? And they were generally around a 25% tariff, and this would include things like industrial machinery, steel. If you remember, there was a lot made about, not getting steel from China, aluminum, and just lots of stuff, chemicals, all sorts of things.
Apparel, furniture, some electronics, some electrical products, also things like solar panels and things like that. I mean, it was a bunch of categories, and then a lot of stakeholders in the US say, oh, wait a minute, this doesn't really make sense. Let's target a bit differently. So a lot of product HS codes were exempted or had lower, 10% tariffs instead of 20 or 25%. It's quite complicated, but basically, from that HBR article that I mentioned, let me see, about 60% of the trade between the US and China is subject to about 20% tariffs, right? And that was at the end of Trump's first term, right? So that's a lot of products. That's a lot of stuff.
Yes.
And the thing is, what really happened is that a lot of the final assembly, at least for big companies, moved to places like Vietnam and so on. A lot of the value still flows to China, and all of these products still depend on China anyway.
Well, we'll see. We'll see if that's going to be allowed to be allowed to be seen as acceptable, because I think they're going to be wise to that for sure.
Yeah, let's see. Well, I think the Biden administration kind of theorized it and said, well, look, it's kind of positive to keep it like that, because when you move, look at China, let's say a lot of manufacturing maybe was in Taiwan, let's say 1990. And then over time, maybe the final assembly moved to China. And then once final assembly moved to China, then little by little, and then very quickly around, let's say 2000, a lot of the component suppliers were pressured into, hey, you got to make your components also in mainland China because that's where assembly is, and we need to keep everything close together, and it makes a lot more sense, right? And then suddenly, a lot of things moved to China. But it started with final assembly. So the idea is, yeah, okay, maybe in Vietnam, in India, right now it's final assembly, fine, but then over time, they will build some of the component, they will make, I don't know, plastic injection molding and CNC machining and this kind of stuff. And then over time, they will do more and more things, and that's how you chip away at China's dominance. But, are we seeing this? Yeah, but it's a slow process.
And as a president who's only going to be in for another 4 years, well, theoretically, right. Is he going to wait for India's, entire supply chain infrastructure to be built up? Because you and I both know, and I mean, you've been to India more than once recently, and it's not there yet at all. And it's going to take longer than 4 years, isn't it?
Well, it is there for certain things, very specifically, yes. But yeah, we deal a lot in electronic products, right? And it's not really there. A lot of things are still imported from China for sure.
Absolutely.
But anyway, that's the situation. Yeah.
Okay, so basically, did the tariffs work? We've covered it. I've got some data. Again, I can't guarantee this is 100% right, but in my research, right, and I read that by 2020. Imports from China were supposedly down in the States by over 25% compared to before the tariffs were put in place in 2017. So
wait. You're talking 2020, but is there a COVID effect here?
That's possible from the data that I'm reading.
Yeah, right.
But on the other hand, COVID was supposed to have caused a boost in imports from China because, of course, during COVID, China was exporting like crazy because everybody was shopping online, no?
Except that there was basically no production for a while until the factories were allowed to reopen, if I remember. And then business was really down. A lot of orders were canceled in the first half of 2020. So 2020, maybe by the end of 2020, things were dynamic. But overall, 2020, I'm not sure was a great year. 2021 was much more dynamic, I think.
So theoretically, the tariffs were able to perhaps put a dent in the trade imbalance, which I suppose is what they want to see. But have they really been effective? Time will very much tell, but we'll see once he comes back in as well, whether the prices go down and whether more jobs do come back to the States. But that didn't seem to be the case in the first lot of tariffs. Right. Let's move on to exactly what has been said more recently. We've covered 2018, for example, and talked more generally about tariffs. Now, recently, President-elect Trump announced just, several days ago, really, his plan is to implement a 25% tariff on all goods imported from Canada and Mexico, and then add an additional 10 to those from China. So that's a 35% on, all goods. Now, I don't know how feasible that is, but because
no, it's not all goods. Yeah, it's not all goods. It's 10% extra on top of what is currently in place. And there's a lot of product categories that are, have zero tariff. So for them, it would go up to 10%. Again, this is not signed, right? These are announcements. And if it's things that are currently 25%, then they go up to 35%, basically.
So, this hasn't gone over well in, Canada, Mexico, or China. And I think there was talk of definitely tariffing products coming in from the EU as well. Essentially, I think he kind of wants to use tariffs on all imports, really. we'll see, right? But I think his idea is if we tariff everything, we're going to be able to, maybe drive costs down in terms of tax cuts and things like that. If we take a longer term view of it, if he's the president who cuts taxes, that's obviously going to be very, very popular with a lot of people, certainly the more wealthy people, as is always the way, right? But whether it's feasible or not, we will see. But Canada and Mexico have said, hang on a minute, we're really good trading partners of yours. And there's also the USMCA. It's like the
Right.
trade agreement, which is kind of like being trampled a bit if this comes into place. Not that Trump would care, I suppose, but they vowed to retaliate, of course. And, motor businesses, they do a lot of manufacturing, like Ford, for example, in Mexico. So if Mexico puts tariffs on the States, would this affect the US job market? Would it cause, things like inflation and certainly make products more expensive, which again could drive inflation? Yeah, maybe. And Canada, kind of the same, really. The Canadian industry is very tied to America in many ways. So again, if you put retaliatory tariffs on, the same effect. China, well, they've already been well versed in dealing with this, but they've denounced it and said, well, you're starting a new trade war. This isn't good for global security or anybody. But I think one thing to mention with China as well is that Trump says that they are playing a leading role in getting this, fentanyl into the States. And so the tariff is kind of just like a punishment for that, right?
So that's what he wrote, right?
Yeah.
And when was it? 2 days ago, I was talking with one of our customers here. Oh, yesterday. They say, oh, but Trump is just a beep, let's say a freaking bully, right? That's all he is. He's just starting with a crazy position, and then he wants to get people moving and to get people to the negotiating table and blah blah blah. But he's just a big bully, right? And that's what it is. And the effect on importers and companies that manufacture and ship things around and everything is just a massive amount of confusion, right? Because what was it? Like Mexico was supposed to be good, just next to the US, and now whoa, they're talking about 25% on everything from Mexico. So what do we do now, right?
Yeah.
And that USMCA agreement was forced by Trump over Canada and Mexico because NAFTA is very bad. That was in his first term or so. And then he said, you got to sign the USMCA. And then they're like, oh, okay. And now we say, USMCA, very bad. We're going to put extra tariffs on you. That just doesn't make any sense. So that's why he cannot really argue that. So he says, well, they're not doing enough for two things. Stopping drugs to go into the U.S. and stopping immigration going into the U.S. And he puts Mexico and Canada exactly on the same level here, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, I'm not sure people are pouring across the frozen tundra in the northern border from Canada to America. I'm sure there are cases of people coming in, but it is funny that, and you do make a good point actually, because let's say China are producing the chemicals which are used to make fentanyl, or maybe fentanyl itself, right? And that's going into the States, and they know that China has a hand in that. I don't know that for a fact, but that's I think the allegation, right? Okay, I understand why you would want to say, no, China, that's got to stop. But with the immigration side of things, it's funny that you would punish Canada as well as Mexico.
Yeah. So it's all in the context of the USMCA. He wants a better deal for the US, basically. And he says, okay, 10% on China right away to get them sort of warmed up. And then, of course, what are they working on in Beijing? They're saying, well, 10% on everything. Then on our side, we're going to do targeted retaliation on certain sectors that are going to hurt his electoral base and so on. So which one should it be? Kind of preparing their response, right? So a lot of importers have already purchased and trying to stockpile things, and now they're probably going to want to get things out of customs in the US before Trump signs that executive order.
Yeah.
That probably means a lot of air shipments are coming up soon. And also, since Trump did not say that he would stop that de minimis exemption, a lot of people are just going to ship stuff, in packages. So instead of sending a container, maybe it's actually cheaper to send things
Loads of
by
packages.
air, and it's faster, and packages, and report them a little bit, undervalue them a bit also. Maybe it's $1,500 and just write that it's 700. And if they don't open it, don't check anyway, who cares, right? So some people might be playing with that, playing with fire, I would say.
Enjoy the loophole while it lasts.
Yeah, right. So all kinds of strategies here, right?
Well, it's funny actually, because you were talking about, there's probably a boom going on of people trying to get additional stock and additional, materials, components, whatever they're buying from China into the States ASAP. And I can understand that. Dan Harris, actually, who was recently on the podcast, if everybody remembers, on his China Law blog, he wrote pretty recently, I think maybe crystal ball gazing, he said, expect tariffs as high as 60% on Chinese imports, affecting nearly all goods entering the US from China. Businesses reliant on these imports should immediately begin preparing for higher costs and or securing alternative suppliers. So that kind of feeds into what you're saying about, get those containers in the water like immediately. Well, it's probably too late. Maybe get those air shipments underway.
Right. And be ready for massively more expensive products. Right. So a lot of if this happens, a lot of companies are going under for sure. Right. Including.
There was another blog post that I read as well, talking about some like tech products. So they said many of the products like laptops and tablets and smartphones, by and large, still made in China, and then paying a full 70% tariffs. That's 60% plus the 10% that you were talking about, the additional 10% on China-made products. So, think about this cost of your new laptop, right? And then you throw 70% on it.
Yeah, no. I mean, just saying it and just trying to imagine it, we see that it's not happening. Okay. I mean, people would definitely invade the Capitol and the White House.
What you mean again?
Yes, right. But this time it would be just, housewives and people need to shop for stuff. It would be like a revolution in such a consumerist society. I mean,
I guess we'll see. I mean, fundamentally, I think that they would have it. The politicians, they would say, "Do not buy Chinese products," and that's fine. Yeah, exactly. And but this is the thing, right? In this fantasy world where, okay, fine, I want to buy my new, plastic kitchen mop, and I'll just go down to the store and I'll select all the ones that are made in India or Vietnam or Malaysia or Turkey or wherever. And, oh, surprise, they don't exist.
Right. Oh, you want toys for Christmas? Don't buy Chinese. Oh, okay, no toys for Christmas.
Yeah.
Hallmark cards and, that's it. Right. Is that going to happen? I mean, come on, let's be serious. Just trying to imagine it makes me laugh. Right. So he's going to bring people to the negotiating table, and he's trying to push his advantage, like, hey, I'm the big bully here, and that's it, and I'm going to do it. And, oh, you don't believe me? Look at that, already 10%. Oh, you don't believe? Okay, now 20%. Now you do believe? That kind of approach, try to get everybody to freak out, like, this guy's nuts, right? That's just his modus operandi, since he was a developer that nobody in New York City wanted to deal with, just because he was he was, just playing games and extracting value. And people were like, well, I don't want to do business with this guy ever again. He lied and he extracted more money than he should from me. And that's it. I don't want to play this game again. Right.
Well,
So
I suppose it's the capitalism way, isn't it? Something else though, actually, with regards to China, in another blog post that Dan Harris wrote recently about the China, Mexico, Canada tariffs specifically, so the really recent one. And everybody, guys, I will give the links to everything that we're talking about and probably more besides, because Renaud and I read a whole bunch of different news sources and blog posts before this, so we at least can say something that makes sense, hopefully. But Dan actually said during Trump's first administration, a major trade deal with China was brokered, wherein China promised to buy $200 billion more in US goods over 2 years to reduce the trade imbalance. However, the reality fell short of the promises, and they only purchased around $80 billion. And so this increased tensions, and actually Trump, he believes, never really forgave China for not fulfilling those promises. So is it a surprise now that he's like, hey guys, I'm back, and now I'm going to hit you with more tariffs unless you really come back to the table and basically do what I say, because I'm not having it. Although I can't imagine the Chinese will react very well to that, because they don't really, the Chinese culture doesn't really react well to threats and things like that, does it? They tend to sort of close off.
Yeah, it's going to be one eye for an eye for an eye for an eye, right? And then, how to say? In a way, it's kind of funny to see Trump negotiating against the Chinese, because, yeah, they all like their sort of sneaky ways, and like, oh, let me show you how much smarter I am than you, and things like that. So it's kind of, they understand each other pretty well. Let's say it this way. They're in the same world. So, and what Trump was saying, and actually it was in the book by Lighthizer, right? He's a trade representative during the first term, and Lighthizer is the one who renegotiated, things with Canada and Mexico, and negotiated the tariffs with the Chinese and all that stuff. And he said, okay, like first tranche and second tranche and third tranche of tariffs, different trade deals, and then when Trump say, okay, we're going to do it on, I forgot, like, let's say $100 billion, and the Chinese say, okay, we're going to put tariffs on $100 billion. Then Trump say, oh, okay, you do that. Okay, then going to do that on, $200 billion. And then Chinese will be like, oh, okay, $200 billion. Okay, then I'm going to do it on whatever, $300 billion. And then Chinese will be like, oh crap, we don't buy that much from you. So the Americans were like, well, it's so imbalanced that if we play this game and you do tit for tat, in the end, you cannot do tit for tat, because, we have more, we buy a lot more from you than you buy from us. All right. So in terms of playing tariffs, we're going to be winning this game in the end. Right. So it's kind of what he still has in mind, I think.
Sort of. Yeah, I would agree. I think the HBR made a point though, because even though there's an imbalance and ultimately China can't tariff as much as the states do, I think one issue is that a lot of the products that were tariffed, because they were focused on quite specific products in some cases. For example, I mentioned steel, aluminum. You mentioned the solar panels as well, right? These were Chinese goods that were actually hard to replace. So the Chinese exporters didn't need to change their prices, because they knew that basically, okay, the Americans are tariffing us, but they can't go anywhere else. They got to keep buying them.
Yeah. And there's this whole idea of, oh, whatever, we'll make the Chinese pay for it. And in some cases, American importers got the Chinese side to share in, and maybe, we have a 10% tariff, we're going to have to raise prices by 5%, but we cannot pass everything through. And if you want to keep selling to us, you get to, share. Okay, let's do half. You reduce the price by 5%. And this was typically more on ODM products that were sold, it was the Chinese supplier's product, and they were making a good fat margin, and they're like, oh, okay, I reduce a little bit and let's keep things going, right? But is that what happens when you buy, 20 containers of a certain kind of product? I mean, the Chinese side is probably not making 20% margin. Okay. So they're not going to give a lot of their margin away. And they might just say, well, that's it. Like they're thinking, what, I make 3-4% margin, like max on this. And you want me to give you 5%, 10% off? Like, go to hell. That's it. No, sorry.
But good luck finding another Chinese supplier that would as well, because for the same order volume.
Forget it. Yeah, in certain industries, forget it. People know when when they have a good product that's not easily replaceable, because it's not like you can go from one supplier to the next easily, right? In some cases, it's near impossible, right? And in some cases, the product category is pretty special, and they know maybe there's 5 suppliers that do these kind of things, and they all talk to each other, and that's it. Okay, that's the policy. Okay, I'm going to do the same. Yeah, I agree. Let's just maintain prices, whatever they ask for, and that's it. You're stuck. What are you going to do?
Yep.
There's also something else we didn't mention, but when was that? 2 or 3 days ago, Trump also had some kind of tweet saying, hey, this country, the BRICS countries, I don't like what they're doing. They're trying to prepare a new reserve currency or something to replace the US dollar. If they want to do that, if they don't commit to like not doing that, then we'll hit them with 100% tariff.
Wow.
Wait a minute.
This
So
is a good point.
that includes India, okay, which is one of the main contenders to, an alternative to China for manufacturing products at scale. And it's not just about Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, and China. It's also the other countries that have joined BRICS recently, like Ethiopia, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and so on. And also, there's a bunch of countries that are on the candidate list, like, hey, we are friendly countries and we're interested and we want to cooperate closely. And then, at one point, we're interested in joining the BRICS. And that includes Vietnam, Thailand, and Malaysia, right? So, and again, so you have that, and you have like, Mexico, 25%, and everybody's like, what? So what's left here? Like manufacturing in the US? Like seriously? Okay.
Yeah.
So what is the minimum we can do in the US? Can we just keep things together and we're going to be fine? No. In theory, the US Customs and Border Protection wants substantial transformation. So we need to have a bunch of people working on that in the US. Like, can we even find people who want to do that?
Well,
and how much does it cost? And
the sort of people that might be working in a factory as an operator on an assembly line. Yeah, I mean, we all know where they'd be from, Central or South America, and I'm pretty sure one of his policies would see that workforce perhaps sent home. So, yeah, that's not going to work, is it?
Yeah, right. He wants to send how many people that are not fully legal? Like more than a million?
Millions, I think, right?
Yeah, right. So
that's a good point. And my understanding is he said it would be wonderful if the BRICS nations were cut off from the US economy. If everything was tariffed by 100%. But yeah, I don't know how many countries can you cut off before there's none left.
I think now it's down to the psychology of that guy, and I think we've reached the end of the episode because I don't want to go into that very dark topic.
No, that's somewhere we don't want to go. Great. Okay, so that's the update, right? That's what we know at this point. If anything else comes out that's very specific, we'll podcast about it again. But just to recap, we've talked about tariffs in a more general basis. We talked about the tariffs that were originally put in place in 2018. Did they work? Kind of, but kind of not in some ways. Prices did go up in some cases for American consumers. Manufacturing jobs basically didn't come back to the States. Let's be honest about it, right? But there's perhaps some evidence that it did reduce some imports from China, and that's fair, I suppose, because a lot of people, we have seen American importers, trying to get their goods assembled, at least in Vietnam, India, places like this, Malaysia. So that's going to be technically not coming in from China. So there's definitely been a chunk that's gone. New tariffs, well, Trump's saying 25% on from the US to Mexico, Canada, and China, with an extra 10% on China. Whether this
tariffs on products coming from Canada, Mexico, or China. Yeah, maybe that's what you wanted to say. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I'm getting tongue tied, right? And so will these sort of universal tariffs ever take off? We don't know. It sounds like really it's kind of more of a bargaining chip, and it's like, here's my position. What are you guys going to do about it? Which is, of course, he wants to get people to the table and try to push them into doing something that benefits the states in his view, which I can understand. So are the tariffs actually in place now? No. Will they ever be? We don't know. Possibly in some form. Let's see. Let's see if he can get everybody to the table. I don't know. Is that a fair recap?
Yeah. Let's see, because right now, what I see and talking with our customers, there's a massive amount of, confusion. Yeah. What's going on? What's this guy going to do? He wants to hit China, but then what? Who's next?
Yeah, we have referred to numerous blogs and things like that. There'll be a bunch of links in the show notes. If you've got any questions, please contact us. We'll be happy to respond. And also if there's a topic you want us to cover in the podcast as well. But yeah, let's call it a day, Renaud. Good one today. And we will be back next week as we normally are.
Yep. All right.
Thanks again for listening to this podcast brought to you by the Southeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share, because it will really help others discover us too.